nice and generous introduction. This is our first campaign event in Indiana. This will not be our last campaign. With your help, we're going to win here in Indiana. We began this campaign about a year ago. We started off with no political organization, no money, no name recognition outside of Vermont. Anybody here been to Vermont? I'm a visitor, so we're a beautiful state. And we were considered by the media and the punditry and the establishment to be a fringe candidate. Not only were we taking on Wall Street, corporate America, super PACs, and the corporate media, we were taking on the entire Democratic political establishment here in Indiana and all over this country, including hundreds of super PAC delegates who had made their decision for Secretary Clinton even before we got into the race. And on top of that, we were taking on the most powerful political organization in this country, a political organization that had elected Bill Clinton president on 2 occasions and ran a very strong campaign for Hillary Clinton in 2008. Other than that, our task was a pretty easy task. Well, a lot has happened in the last year. When we began this campaign, we were 3% in the national polls, and yet in the last couple of weeks, some of the national polls had us in the lead or a little bit. One, as of today, primaries and caucuses in 17 states throughout this country. Indiana will be the 18th. We have won over 1,350 delegates to the Democratic National Convention, and in the last several weeks, or many weeks, poll after poll has shown us not only to be defeating Donald Trump and the other Republican candidates, but to be defeating him by a much greater margin than Secretary Clinton. If we want a candidate who will be the strongest Democratic candidate to defeat Trump or any other Republican nominee, you're looking at that candidate. And the reason for that is pretty obvious. More than obvious. And that is, not only are the issues that we are talking about generating enormous excitement and energy throughout this country, and excitement and energy which will result in Democrats win elections, when people are hopeful, when they are excited, when they understand we can bring real change to this country, and that is what this country. But from a very narrow political perspective, the reason that I am the strongest candidate is that our campaign is appealing not just to Democrats, but to independents independents all over this country, and even some Republicans. Now, what I hope that many of the delegates to the Democratic Convention understand is that the national election is an open process. Guess what? Independents vote in that process. And it turns out that we are overwhelmingly winning the independent vote. And let me also make it clear so that there is no confusion. We are in this campaign to win and become the Democratic nominee. And we are behind today. But you know what? Unusual things happen in politics. And with your help, we are going to win the pledged delegates. And with your help, super delegates may well reach the conclusion that Bernie Sanders will be the strongest candidate against Donald Trump or any other. We are in this campaign to win, but if we do not win, we intend to win every delegate that we can, so that when we go to Philadelphia in July, we're going to have the votes to put together the strong that does not exist today. See whether I am president or not, a nation in which we have one of the lowest voter turnouts in this world. I want to see the United States have one of the highest voter turnouts of any major country on earth. I want a democracy in which every person in this room, in this state, in this country understands that together, all of us have enormous power, that together we can transform this country, that together we understand that the United States government has got to represent all of the people, not just wealthy campaign contributors. The very rich get richer. Corporations enjoy huge profits, while the middle class continues to decline because millions of Americans have given up on our democracy. There you go. Here is the reality. You don't hear this in the media very much, and that's a whole other problem. It's a whole other problem that we have got to address. And that is that the reality of life in Vermont or in Indiana or any other country in this country is not necessarily reflected in what you see on TV. So when we talk about the real issues facing this country, it's not going to be the issues you see on 10-second sound bites. You are going to have to go into your hearts and your souls and think about it. What are the real issues facing America, and how do we create the kind of nation that we know we can become? Well, it's more than electing Bernie Sanders. It's by having a political revolution. Make understand what some of the problems are. And what this campaign has done in a unique way is have the courage to deal with the real issues facing this country, even when they are unpleasant realities. You know, in life, truth is not always easy, not for us personally or for us politically. But we do not advance as human beings or as a nation if we sweep the real problems under the rug. We have got to have the courage and the determination to deal with those issues.
That's right.
Let me tell you what some of the issues are, issues that other candidates will not. Number one, democracy itself is not a complicated process. It means that you gotta vote, you gotta vote, you gotta vote, you gotta vote. One person, one vote. That's pretty much what democracy is. What democracy is not is a corrupt campaign finance system that allows billionaires to buy elections. Brothers and a handful of billionaires prepared to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to elect candidates who represent the wealthy and the powerful. That is not democracy. You know what that is? That is oligarchy. And you know what oligarchy is? Oligarchy is a form of society in which a small number of very wealthy and powerful people not only control the economy, but control the political life of a nation. We are moving in that direction, but together we will not allow that to happen. In this room, regardless of your political views, you're progressive, you're moderate, you're conservative, you should have the right to run for office without begging millionaires for campaign contributions. Democracy means that we should not have Republican governors all over this country trying to suppress the vote, making it harder for people to participate in the democratic process. Our job is to make it easier for people to participate in the vote. But it is not only a corrupt campaign finance system that we have got to change, it is a rigged economy. Is about. And again, this is not stuff you're going to see on television very often. Not stuff you read about in the papers, because the people who own the media do not necessarily want to have this kind of discussion. Here is America today. Top 1/10% now owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. Wealthiest 20 people, not a lot of people, now own more wealth than the bottom 150 million Americans, half of our nation's population.
That's wrong.
Here is a rigged economy. One family, who's the wealthiest family in America? Anyone know? All right, think about this. One family, the Walton family, who owns Walmart. Walmart is the largest private sector employer in this country. This one family owns more wealth than the bottom 40% of the American people. This one family pays its employees at Walmart wages that are so low that many of those workers are forced to go on food stamps and Medicaid. A rigged economy, and this is just one example of it, a rigged economy is when you, in the middle class, are paying higher taxes to subsidize the employees for the wealthiest family in America. You should not be having to subsidize Walmart employees. And what I say to the Walton family is get off of welfare, pay your workers a living wage. What this campaign is about is asking the American people to think outside of the box, outside of the status quo. Do not accept the options and the choices that the Congress or the media provide to you. Oh, do we cut food stamps or do we cut education? Those are not the choices that we have to make. 40 years ago, and young people here may not believe me, and you can Google it after you get out of here, not now. But I want you to think about this. 40, 50 years ago, before all of the modern technology that we have that has made workers more productive, before all of the global economy that we have today, one worker in a family, the breadwinner in a family, could work 40 hours a week and earn enough money to take care of the entire family. One worker, 40 hours a week, can earn enough money to take care of the family. Today, most of you do not know any families where mama is not, do not know any families where mama is not working, where dad is not working, where the kids are not working. Why is it that in America today, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, why is it that millions of our people are working 2 or 3 jobs? People are working 40, 50, 60 hours a week in order to provide for their families. That is a question that we have got to answer. And the answer to it has everything to do with corporate greed. It has everything to do with a political system which is controlled by big money interests. So the folks in Washington are much more interested in giving tax breaks to billionaires than they are making certain that middle-class families have a decent standard of living. Now, when we talk about transforming a great economy, what does it mean? Number one, it means that when we have massive inequalities in wealth and income, and in income, get this, despite the fact that our people are working the longest hours of any people in the industrialized world, 58% of all income generated today is going to the top 1%. So what our job is about is creating an economy that works for all of us, not just the people on top. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? And what does it mean here in Indiana? In Indiana, since 2007, remember, an explosion of technology, worker productivity increasing, growing global economy. In Indiana, since 2007, real median income, that family right in the middle of the economy, their income has gone down by more than $4,700. All right, you know why people in Indiana are angry? People in Vermont are angry. They're working longer hours for low wages, and they're going nowhere in a hurry. A great nation is not judged by the number of millionaires it has or by the number of nuclear weapons it has. It is judged by how well it treats the weakest and most vulnerable among us. Its children. In the United States of America today, we have, by far, the highest rate of childhood poverty country on earth. In Indiana, your great state, over 330,000 kids are living in poverty, over 21% of all of the children in this state. In Indiana, and I just use Indiana as an example, these problems exist from Maine, Vermont to California. Not just in Indiana, but in Indiana, 16,000 public school students were homeless during the 2012-2013 school year. 16,000 young people homeless. In Indianapolis, child poverty rate is over 30%. When we talk about the economy and the need to create an economy that works for all of us, we need to change our disastrous trade policies. This is an issue that many think is not a particularly sexy issue. The media doesn't talk about it at all. Never. Virtually never. But it is an issue of enormous consequence for working families in Indiana, Vermont, and all over this country. Since 2001, our nation has lost almost 60,000 factories and millions of good-paying jobs. Now, not all of those job losses are attributable to trade, but many of them are. You know what these trade agreements are about, what NAFTA is about, PNTR, trade agreement with China is about? It is not complicated. You have these large corporations who sit around and write these trade agreements. You don't write them. Workers don't write them. Corporate America writes them. And they say, okay, how do we make more money? Why do we want to pay a worker in Indiana $20, $25 an hour when we can shut down here, move to Mexico, move to China, pay people very low wages, and then bring the product back into this country? That, in a nutshell, is what these trade agreements were written to do, and that's exactly what's happened. Over the last many years, millions of Americans have lost their decent paying jobs. Since the establishment of NAFTA in 1994, Indiana has lost 113,000 good paying manufacturing jobs. 113,000 good jobs. 2014, Caterpillar threw 250 workers out on the street and moved their engine manufacturing plant to China. In 2009, Delta Faucet shut down its manufacturing plants in Greensburg and moved to China, throwing 265 workers out on the street. And in February, Carrier and United Technologies announced they would be shutting down 2 manufacturing plants in Indiana, throwing 2,100 workers out on the street and moving to Monterrey, Mexico, where they can pay workers $3 an hour. This is a company that made a profit of more than $7 billion last year. Crap. This is a company that pays its CEO over $14 million in compensation last year. Come on! This is the type of corporate behavior that has got to end. One of the very strong differences between Secretary Clinton and myself is I have opposed every one of these disastrous trade agreements. She has supported virtually every one of these trade agreements. I say to corporate America to carry it to all of these large corporations. If you want us to purchase your products, start manufacturing them in Indiana, Vermont, and America, not in China. This campaign is listening to ordinary Americans, not just wealthy campaign contributors. And what ordinary working people are telling me is they cannot make it on $7.25 an hour minimum wage. We need to raise the minimum wage to a living wage, $15 an hour. want 79 cents on the dollar compared to men. They want the whole dollar. That is why I know every man here will stand with the women in the fight for pay equity. This campaign is listening to young people. And here's what young people are telling me. Two profound messages. Number one, I grew up, like millions of other people, in a family that did not have a lot of money. But my parents worked hard, and what the American dream is about is parents work hard so their kids can do better than they. That's the American dream. Yet today, the younger generation, for the first time in the history of this country, modern history of this country, stands a chance to have a lower standard of living than your parents. Well, you know what? Together, we are not going to allow that to happen. Dream to die. Together, we are going to see the middle class of this country expand, not shrink. Together, we're going to end the disgrace of 47 million people living in poverty. And here's also what young people are telling me. What they are asking me is, how does it happen that when we do what our parents tell us to do, when we do what our teachers tell us to do, when we go out and get the best education that we can, why do we have to leave school saddled with debt of $30,000, $50,000, $70,000? Why do we have to pay off that debt for decades? Outside of the box and outside of the status quo is about. It is asking one simple question, three-letter word. Why? If we all understand that A, we are the wealthiest country in the history of the world, B, that education and learning is what human beings are about, C, that we live in a competitive global economy. And a competitive global economy, we need the best educated workforce in the world. We need all of you and every American to get all of the education he or she needs in order to do the work we need in a modern society. If we must have a well-educated workforce, why are we punishing people for getting an education? We should reward them, not punish them. That is why I believe two things. Number one, this is the year 2016. 50 years ago, if you had a high school degree, the odds are you're going to go out and get a pretty good job. But the world has changed, the economy has changed, technology has changed. You need, the younger generation needs more education than previous generations. That's just a fact. And that is why when we look at public education today, you got to get out of the thinking which says, well, first grade to 12th grade. That was great 50 years ago. When we talk about public education today, what that must mean is making public colleges and universities tuition free. Think about it for a second. Is this idea, making public colleges and universities tuition free, a radical idea? It is not a radical idea. It is a common sense idea. The world changes. Our educational system has got to change with it if we are going to succeed. And when we make public colleges and universities tuition free, by the way, we do something which is revolutionary. Right now in Lafayette, right now in Burlington, Vermont, there are children in the 4th or 6th grade. Their parents, like my parents, never went to college. They're struggling families, and for these kids, the idea of getting a college education is as likely as going to the moon. It is not within their world purview. They just don't believe it's possible. And these are the kids that are going to drop out of high school or never even think about getting a higher education. But if we can make it clear to every child, every parent, every teacher in America, that if a young person does his or her schoolwork well, takes school seriously, that child will in fact be able to get a college education regardless of the income of that family. That is revolutionary. That will transform education in this country and give hope to millions of young people who today do not have that hope. Is student debt. How many people here are worried about student debt? Anybody here not worried about student debt would probably be the better question. All right. What we have got to do with student debt is to allow all people with debt to refinance their loans at the lowest interest rates they can find. Now, at this point is something we should think about. People say, well, Bernie, you know, you're just a nice guy, you're Santa Claus. You're giving away free tuition in public colleges. You're going to lower everybody's student debt. You're going to buy everybody a big Cadillac, big house. You're just a nice guy. How are you going to pay for free tuition? How are you going to pay to lower student debt? And that's a fair question. But this is where we have got to think outside of the box. 8, 9 years ago, as all of you know, the greed and the recklessness and illegal behavior on Wall Street drove this country into the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression of the 30s. And what did Congress do when Wall Street went crawling into Congress for a bailout? They voted for that bailout. I did not vote for that bailout. But they got their bailout because they're very powerful and they spent billions of dollars to deregulate Wall Street. They spent a lot of money on lobbying to get the bailout. Okay, that's the way the world works today. So I happen to think that right now, with Wall Street doing phenomenally well, that we should impose a tax on Wall Street speculation. And that tax alone, not a radical idea, it exists in other countries, actually used to exist in this country. That tax on speculation would bring in more than enough money to make public colleges and universities tuition-free and substantially lower student debt. And once again, this is not a radical idea. It exists in other countries around the world. The only problem with it is Wall Street does not think it's a great idea. I think it's a great idea. And what this campaign is about is telling Wall Street, telling corporate America, telling the billionaire class they cannot have it all. We bail them out. Now it is Wall Street's time to help the working families of this country. I want to give you another example of what a rigged economy is about. I want you to think this one through, because it will tell you all that you need to know about what goes on in this country politically, what goes on economically, and what goes on through a criminal justice system which is broken. Some of you may have noticed that a few weeks ago, a large financial institution called Goldman Sachs. Anyone here ever hear of Goldman Sachs? You've heard of Goldman Sachs. All right, here are the facts that we have got to absorb. Not pleasant facts, not happy talk. This is not TV happy talk. This is American political reality. Goldman Sachs, 2 or 3 weeks ago, reaches an agreement with the United States government to pay $5 billion in a settlement. Why are they reaching an agreement for $5 billion? The answer is that they were selling worthless packages of subprime mortgage loans. In other words, they were engaging in massive fraud. And by the way, this is not just Goldman Sachs, this is every other major institution on Wall Street. The most powerful economic entities in this country engaging in massive fraud. That is a fact. That's issue number one. Issue number two. Over the last number of decades, Goldman Sachs itself, one company, has given Republican and Democratic administrations, secretaries of the Treasury, and other high-ranking political officials. In other words, they're involved in what we call the revolving door. You all know what the revolving door is? The revolving door is when you have people from Wall Street and corporate America leave their companies temporarily, go to work for the government, do the work of Wall Street in the government, then leave the government and go back to Wall Street. That's called the revolving door. Wall Street government back to Wall Street. Goldman Sachs has given this country 2 secretaries of the Treasury under Democratic and Republican administration and many other high-ranking officials. Number 3, Goldman Sachs, like other powerful Wall Street institutions, contributes huge amounts of money into political campaigns. In fact, Secretary Clinton has received some $15 million for her super PAC from Wall Street. And as some of you may know, she gave speeches behind closed doors to Goldman Sachs, other Wall Street institutions for $225,000 a speech. That is called political power. When you have that kind of money to give, pay people for speeches or make campaign contributions, that means you have enormous political power. Point number 4, and this is the one I think even more than the other points really galls the American people. Some kid in Indiana gets picked up today for smoking marijuana. That kid will have a criminal record for the rest of his life. But if you are an executive of a Wall Street institution whose illegal behavior cost millions of people their jobs, their homes, and their life savings, you do not get a criminal record, you get an increase in your compensation package. Now, there's something wrong with a criminal justice system in which a large financial institution pays a $5 billion settlement, but nobody gets a criminal record. Well, together, you know what we're going to do? We're going to bring real reforms to our criminal justice system, and we are going to bring justice back. And that means it's not just kids smoking marijuana who get a criminal record. It is executives on Wall Street who break the law as well. While we're on criminal justice, let's touch on a couple of important facts that we cannot sweep under the rug. Every person in this room, in this state, in this country, should be embarrassed that in the United States of America we have more people in jail than any other country on earth. More people in jail in this country. We are spending $80 billion a year, state, federal, local expenditures, locking up fellow Americans, disproportionately African American, Latino, and Native Americans. Not an easy job, but we can do it, is to ask why it is that so many of our people are in jail. And I'll start off with this proposition, that among kids in this country, young people who are high school graduates, the unemployment rate and underemployment rate is 30, 40, or 50%, 51% for young African American kids. So here is a not so radical idea. We're going to invest in jobs and education for our young people rather than in jails and incarceration. Cities of this country rather than putting them in jail cells. When we talk about criminal justice, we are talking about reforming local police departments all over this country. I am a former mayor. I work with police officers in my state and from other states as well. Vast majority of police officers are honest and hardworking people doing a very difficult job. Being a police officer today. But, like any other public official, when a police officer breaks the law, that officer must be held accountable. Criminal justice reform means ending. It means demilitarizing local police departments so they do not look like occupying armies. Look like the diversity of the communities they serve. It means ending private ownership of jails and detention centers. It means rethinking the so-called war on drugs. In the last 30 years, millions of Americans have received police records for possession of marijuana. Today, under the Federal Controlled Substance Act, marijuana is listed as a Schedule I drug alongside of heroin. That is crazy. That is why I've introduced legislation to take marijuana out of the Federal Controlled Substance Act. Legal, but it should not be, possession of marijuana should not be a federal crime. Let me just mention to you something that I know all of you are aware of, and that is that in our country today we have a major crisis regarding opiate addiction and drug addiction and heroin addiction. Now, this is an awful crisis because every single day we're seeing people dying of overdoses. In my view, the best way to address that crisis is to understand that substance abuse and addiction is a health issue, not a criminal issue. Which means we need a revolution in mental health treatment in this country. Which means that people should be able to get the treatment that they need when they need it, not 6 months from now. Which means that instead of giving tax breaks to billionaires, we should be investing in psychologists, in counselors, in clinics, in every community. I'm a member of the U.S. Senate Committee on the Environment. And let me tell you what the scientists all over this world have told me. Climate change is real. Climate change is caused by human activity. Climate change is already doing devastating harm to our country and countries all over the world. We have, in my view, a moral responsibility as custodians of this planet to make sure that the planet we leave our children and future generations is a planet that is healthy and is habitable. And that means that we have got to take on the fossil fuel industry and tell them that their short-term profits are not more important than the future of this planet. We can create millions of good-paying green jobs by transforming our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency, to wind, solar, geothermal, and other sustainable technologies. I believe that this issue is an international, global crisis, and that is why I have introduced the strongest climate change legislation in the history of the Senate, which, among other things, calls for a tax on carbon. It's exactly the right thing to do. Secretary Clinton does not support a tax on carbon. I am right, she is wrong. And before I knock this bottle of water over again, I do this every event. We're cleaning the floors of arenas all over America. But let me tell you something, that the issue of clean drinking water is one of the great crises that our country and the world must address. That is why I believe that we cannot continue to poison our aquifers all over this country, why we need a ban on fracking. This is, I think, a no-brainer. I mean, this is a no-brainer. I was in Flint, Michigan a couple of months ago where children are seeing cognitive brain damage because of the lead in the water, but it's not just Flint. We're having water problems in hundreds of communities throughout this country. Let's address that crisis. Let's improve and clean up our water systems. Let's not make them worse by continuing fracking. That is my point of view. That is not Secretary Clinton's point of view. In fact, when she was Secretary of State, she actually pushed the technology of fracking on countries throughout the world.
Frack no!
This campaign, if it means anything, it means asking the American people to think outside of the status quo, to ask what kind of nation we, the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, should be. If we were a poor country, we would have a certain type of debate. We would say, well, yes, of course we want a great educational system, but we're poor people. We can't afford it. Of course we would want a good infrastructure, roads and bridges and water system, but we're a poor country. We just can't afford it. It's unfortunate that our roads are deteriorating, our bridges are collapsing. And there you go. This kid is really worried about that. We are not a poor country. We are the richest country in the history of the world. Now, most people don't know that because almost all the new income and wealth goes to the top 1%. But it is important for all of us to know that. So when we talk about the needs of the American people, we have got to ask ourselves a question. Why is it that we are the only major country on earth, and I'm talking about the UK, France, Germany, Holland, Scandinavia, Italy, Canada, all major countries. They all guarantee health care to all of their people as a right. We are the only major country on earth that doesn't. Now, most Americans say, of course we should. What's the problem? I'll tell you what the problem is. The problem is the private health insurance industry wants to make billions and billions of dollars from human sickness and suffering. The problem is that the pharmaceutical industry last year had the 3 top drug companies making $45 billion in profit, while millions of Americans cannot afford the prescription drugs they need. That is exactly what this campaign is about. Do we stand with the insurance companies or the drug companies, or do we stand with the millions of people today who have no health insurance or are underinsured or are paying prices for prescription drugs they just cannot afford? I think we stand with the American people. I think we join the rest of the American people. The vision is that healthcare is a right of all people. You know what that means? We don't know it because we don't have it. We're not used to it. This is what it means. It means that you can go to the doctor when you're sick and not worry about your deductible or your copayment. It means that, God forbid, you have an accident or a serious illness, you don't have to worry about paying off hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical bills. Which is revolutionary. It means that when every person in this country has health care as a right, you do not have to stay on a job that you hate simply because you got good health insurance. It means that we can unleash the entrepreneurial spirit of the American people. You can go out, start a new business, and not worry about having health insurance for your family. That's what it means. And it means that the drug companies will not charge us the highest prices in the world for the medicine that we need. All of you know that real change, if you think about American history, you understand that real change never takes place from the top on down. It's never some guy in the White House signing a bill or a Supreme Court making a decision. It is the people at the grassroots level by the millions who are demanding real change. That is what history always teaches us. Think back. Think back 100+ years ago when workers in this country were working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, when children in America were working in factories and on farms. And working people came together by the millions over the years. And they said that just because we're a worker doesn't mean we're not a human being. We want dignity on the job. We're going to form a union and engage in collective bargaining. Steel workers and the other great unions helped create the middle class of this country. Think about 200 years ago, amidst the abomination of slavery, and incredibly brave people, African Americans and their allies, way back, they were saying slavery and racism and bigotry and discrimination, that is not what this country will be. And they stood up, and we don't know How many of them died? How many of them were beaten? How many went to jail? How many lost their jobs because they stood up for justice? Like they did, and we made real changes. That is how real change takes place. Young people, the kids today, many of our children do not know, because this is how fast the world changes. Less than 800 years ago, no time at all from a historical perspective. Women in America did not have the right to vote, did not have the right to get the education they wanted, or do the jobs they wanted. Society defined the role for women. You stay home, you have babies, that is your function. That was less than 100 years ago. But women and their male allies said, sorry, that is not what America will be. Women will not be second-class citizens. That is how shame. Nobody gave that to women. They had to fight for it. If we were in this room 10 years ago, no time at all, somebody jumps up and says, hey Bernie, you know, I think that by the year 2015, gay marriage will be legal in every state in this country. 10 years ago, somebody would say that. The person right next to them would say, you're crazy. That ain't gonna happen. But what happened is the gay community and their straight allies stood up, fought back against incredible that we are seeing today in Mississippi and in North Carolina. It's not over yet. It will be over, but it's not over yet. And yet what the gay community and their straight allies said, that in America, people have a right to love whoever they want, regardless of their gender. And they transformed this country. Let me give you one more example, which is very, very contemporary. And my point here is how change takes place and will take place in the future. If we were in this room 4 years ago, no time at all, 4 years ago, somebody jumps up and says, you know, Bernie, this $7.25 an hour minimum wage is a starvation wage. We have got to raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. Person next to her would have said, $15 an hour? You're crazy. You want to more than double the federal minimum wage of $7.25. You can't do that. You're thinking too radically. You're thinking too big. All right, $9 an hour. Maybe we can get $10 an hour. $15 an hour, impossible. But what happened? What happened is that workers in the fast food industry, working at McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, other fast food places, they went out on strike. They stood up, they fought back, and they told America, we can't make it on $7.25 an hour. And then you know what happened? 2 years ago in Seattle, Washington, in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, city councils passed legislation, $15 an hour. State of Oregon, state of California, state of New York, $15 an hour. And if I have anything to say about it, and I will if elected president, we're going to have $15 an hour in every state. But here is the point, and this is the most important point that I want to make to you. Change takes place when we are prepared to stand up and fight for that change. The most serious problem we face in this country are not the many crises, the objective crises that we face. The more serious crisis that we face is the establishment in the media, in the Congress, every single day, in a million different subtle ways, tell you real change is not possible. You are stuck with the status quo, and there is nothing that you can do about it. And what this campaign is about is to say to the establishment, sorry, you are wrong. We are going to change the status quo. Here is what is taking place right now. I've been all over this country, from Maine to California. What is taking place is people are looking around them, and they're saying, wait a second. Why is it that we have an unbelievably grotesque level of income and wealth inequality? Is America supposed to be about so few having so much and so many having so little? Is America supposed to be a country in which we're seeing the proliferation of millionaires and billionaires, and yet we have millions of children living in terrible poverty? Is America supposed to be the only major country on earth that does not guarantee paid family and medical leave to its workers? Are we supposed to be the only major country on earth that doesn't guarantee health care to all of our people as a right? Should we continue to have a corrupt campaign finance system in which billionaires control the political process in this country? Should we continue to have a handful of Wall Street institutions controlling our credit cards and our mortgages, or should we be breaking up these large financial institutions? Should women continue to be making 79 cents on the dollar compared to? Should we be more aggressive in transforming our energy system to combat climate change? Should millions of people have to leave school deeply in debt simply because they wanted a good education? These are the issues that are out there. People all over this country are now beginning to say, you know what, in this great country, we can do a lot better. We can go beyond establishment politics and establishment economics. We can create a government that represents all of us and not just the 1%. This campaign is about. It is not only about electing a president, it is about bringing forth a political revolution where millions of people stand up, fight back, and create the kind of nation we all know we can become. Next week, right here in Indiana on May 3rd, there is going to be a very important Democratic primary. What we have learned up to now is we win in those elections, those primaries and caucuses, where the voter turnout is high. We lose where the voter turnout is low. Next Tuesday, please come out, bring your aunts and your uncles, your friends, your co-workers. Let us have the largest Democratic primary. Indiana history. Let Indiana join the ranks of so many other states who are saying we need a political revolution. Thank you all.